in the US and Europe and in many parts of the globe, critical grid management teams being kind of locked away in cocooning for a month at a time, away from their families, whatever, because, this time 12 months ago, we weren't sure where this thing was headed.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 315. How have power companies used drones during COVID-19? For that question, we head to Nice, France, to speak with Kevin O'Donovan, founder of the boutique technology consulting company, A Bit of This and That. The company is focused on the intersection of technology and the energy industry, delivering innovative technology consultations, sales advisory, speaker, and B2B influencer services. Being a bit of a storyteller, Kevin has been evangelizing how new technologies can transform the way we do things throughout his career. He has a proven track record of bridging the gap between the capabilities a new technology can bring and the practicalities of bringing that technology to market. He has held senior leadership, technical sales, and sales management roles at Compaq, HP, and most recently at Intel, where he was Intel's worldwide sales director for the energy industry. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Kevin talks about how power companies have used drones during the COVID-19 pandemic to maintain operations and, more importantly, keep the lights on for all of us. But before we hear from Kevin, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great idea for a show and want to share it in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's find out how power companies have been using drones during the time of COVID-19 with Kevin O'Donovan. Let's pick up the interview where I ask Kevin to introduce himself.
My name is Kevin O'Donovan, and I spend my time looking at technologies, primarily around, I suppose, what you call now the energy transition across oil and gas and utilities. My background is in enterprise sales from IT world. So I was at Compaq, HP, and most recently with Intel. And that's where I got into drones and the opportunities that drones provide, especially in the energy sector. So I kind of get to look at all the cool gadgets and toys out there today.
Kevin, can you give us an idea of how drones have been used in the power industry?
So over the last, 6-7 years, drones have been used for a multitude of use cases. And I suppose if you look back 5-6 years ago, it was the concept of let's use a drone. And I suppose I'd say a flying drone. And what I mean by that is for doing inspections. So instead of somebody having to turn off a flare stack at a refinery and climb up it and search for cracks, can we fly a drone around it in a controlled fashion and regular pattern, so we can do it every week and compare the images? But can we do visual inspections? And that was for power lines. That was for any kind of physical infrastructure, primarily outside. We then started to see people saying, hey, can I fly drones around inside things, inside tanks, inside boilers? So companies started coming up with drones and technology that you could fly around inside. Again, inspection. You then started seeing people adding in infrared cameras, all sorts of other gas detectors and stuff to drones. So as they were flying around, they were able to detect methane or corrosion and. So that was certainly the whole inspection area. We started to see people using drones beyond visual line of sight for checking pipelines, maybe for checking transmission lines or electric distribution grids over a longer distance, besides having to walk before. Somebody would drive along in a truck or walk along underneath the lines to see what was going on for vegetation and stuff. So that changed. We started to see people using drones, when they're laying new massive transmission line cables between the big pylon towers. they somehow have to get the big cable between the towers. So they started using drones that fly guide wires instead of using helicopters so they could start pulling things across. We started to see people using drones to do deliveries to offshore oil rigs because somebody was missing a tool or a piece of equipment. Now, obviously, it depends on the size, but it just started to use in many aspects. And I suppose then the other angle, while we often talk about the flying drones that crawl around, swim around, walk around, whether you call them robotics or not, but they've all started to a lot of new use cases for that as well.
This past year has been challenging for all industries, Kevin. But what's it been like for the power industry?
The past 12 months, I don't know how many adjectives people have used, but interesting, challenging, there are many of them. The one thing I would credit let's say the broader energy industry with, be it oil and gas, be it renewables, be it the utilities, they've done a magnificent job. And what I mean by that is the energy has stayed flowing and the lights stayed on. Now, granted, we've had natural disasters across the globe in many countries. Here in France, we had floods and hurricanes, the Texas weather, and all over the globe. But at the same time, the impact of COVID has been quite dramatic on energy and utility companies, but yet the lights stayed. We didn't run out of power because of COVID. So I think they deserve a huge credit for that. But it's been very challenging for them. And obviously it differs between country and states and locations. But energy companies the world over faced lockdown challenges. So what do you mean I can't drive into work in the morning and meet up with everybody? I have to work in teams. We've seen in the US and Europe and in many parts of the globe, critical grid management teams being kind of locked away in cocooning for a month at a time, away from their families, whatever, because, this time 12 months ago, we weren't sure where this thing was headed. The other major impact, I think, on the industry is that, there's a lot of technology deployed in oil and gas and utilities and renewables today. And when something breaks or you want to commission something or install something new, many times somebody would jump in a plane from somewhere and fly somewhere and help out, right? Bring in the engineer, he or she would turn up and do their work. That all stopped. So the whole concept of how do I fix things? How do I install things? How do I do inspections when I can't have people flying around, or I can't even have the usual team of 4 or 5 people that would just kind of turn up at the depot in the morning and head off to do work? That didn't happen either. And I've seen companies going, we used to work on paper and we'd hand around the clipboard and everybody would write in their bits and pieces. And then that stopped because, well, you can't be sharing tools and stuff. So it's been a dramatic impact. There's been a lot of challenges, but yet at the same time, the lights stayed on, the energy stayed flowing. So I think they deserve a lot of credit.
And like you said, the lights have stayed on during the past year. How did drones fit into that success?
So once COVID hit, and again, depending on whether you're oil and gas or your utilities, renewables, I suppose what's been fascinating is that there was new installations. There were new refineries, there was new gas fields, there was new offshore wind farms, there was new solar, there was new power plants, new grid lines being built. Some of those slowed down in certain parts of the world and others kept going. And obviously within how they were doing them, they may or may not have been using drones for site surveys and whatever, because in some cases, things like site surveys, inspections, it's kind of become normal. It's not that there's millions of people out there doing it, but, you have core teams and companies that many of us would know, the likes of Cyberhawk and Skydo and Flyability and Precision Hawk and many others. So their work kind of continued, and you'll have seen a lot of stuff online and whatever, where projects got continued. There was more offshore wind built out last year than any year before. So many things continued. What I hear from here, certainly here in Europe, is that some of the inspection work that they had planned, the regular inspection, some of that slowed down because you simply couldn't get the people to the right place, because here in France, for example, you couldn't travel between departments. Now, obviously, if you're working for a utility, oil and gas company, there are special exemptions and legal requirements and. But it still slowed things down. And I suppose the big thing I saw with drones in the energy industry last year was that if you had them already, they used them. There were more companies going, we really should have invested 2 years ago and now we'd have them. That said, I've seen some companies kind of bring out new drone programs, start playing with them. And as I said, especially the folks that focus in oil and gas and utilities, many of the drone service companies, some of them have had really good growth in 2020. There's been demand for what they're doing. There's a lot of new stuff coming with some of the infrastructure challenges around the world, and people go, we need to start using drones. So they've seen good growth. But I suppose that the challenge was their own staff were all working from home. They couldn't get people to jump on a plane to go off and fly somewhere. So a lot of them were hiring people remotely. They never met these people, and they were onboarding them because there was a project in Texas and they didn't have someone in Texas, so they hire someone in Texas and go off and do it in Texas. So there were challenges, but the work went on primarily around inspections, new builds, and. But as I say, there was a lot of online conferences in the past couple of months, and hearing people say, oh, we've had drones and we've used them before, so we found them great because we could keep using them. And it's a small man team or a one man team, depending on what you're trying to do. And others going, yeah, we hadn't done much in drones, and we really should have, because it would have been really handy in the past 12 months. So we need to do it in the future. So I think there's that kind of balance going on, that if you had them, you used them, but it's tough to kick it off the ground when you haven't done it before.
Are there any emerging trends coming out of COVID that we might want to look for?
One of the things that I think is quite interesting to watch as well is that the amount of software and hardware development around AI systems, image recognition, geo-positioning, new LiDAR scanners, infrared, new drones, new technologies, that hasn't slowed down. Now, we may not have seen as many new announcements. And obviously, if you're a startup or a big company, they've all had challenges as well, right? Because their people are working from home and trying to get funding, and you're trying to get a customer and you can't fly off to the customer, whatever. So that's been really hard for people. It's not exactly an industrial fair, but it's kind of the new gadgets fair. CES was online this year. And there were some new things there around drones and software and image recognition. So I do think that once we come out of this, we may start to see that some people have been very busy in the background developing new capabilities, software and hardware, that could be quite useful for industrial use cases, energy use cases going forward.
How about new applications or use cases arising out of the COVID restrictions?
I've seen a couple of oil and gas companies talking about using drones to deliver tools to people. And you're talking about small tools in oil refineries or oil fields and whatever. But before, they'd ring back to the base, some guy jump in a truck and drive out. But maybe there's no one there to drive out, right? Because people weren't around. So how do I get something to somebody? And obviously, depending on where you are in the world, beyond visual line of sight, you're within an oil refinery, are you allowed to fly there? Yada, yada. It changes. But there was that. I'm here in France. My local energy distribution company is Enedis. I saw one of the Enedis, some of their folks, they were using drones to attach what I would call, think of it like a reflector, something hanging from a medium voltage line that reflects, and it's to stop bird strikes. But they were using drones to attach those, whereas before they'd have to bring out a bigger man team to put up a lot of, you call them cherry pickers or whatever, the big extension cranes to get someone up to the line. I've seen Ørsted talking about using flyability drones for doing inside wind turbine blade inspections. Now we're all familiar with wind turbines, and one of the poster child applications, use cases for drones in the energy industry have been doing repeatable inspections of wind turbines from the outside. But you also need to do it inside. And previously, somebody would have to go into the what they call the hub of the wind turbine and crawl into the actual blade. They're hollow in the center, right? And these things are 100, 130 meters long. They can only go in so far because of health and safety. So using things like Flyability's internal drone to go do drone inspections inside a wind turbine blade in the middle of the North Sea. So I do think people are starting to we're finding more and more use cases, things like doing inside inspections of boilers, of oil tanks, of oil tankers. That's kind of becoming standard around, but people are still finding new ways of using them. And I think we're still only, and that's the ones flying around, right? You still see a lot of people talking about things that are crawling and walking. And, if you look here in Europe, there's a huge push around offshore wind, floating offshore wind. So I do think the future around drones for undersea, underwater type of inspections, I think that's only kicking off as well.
There has been a lot of success and adoption in the energy industry. But what challenges remain in regard to drone use?
Obviously, there's still the society aspect in terms of, will society accept drones? And that's an open-ended question. But I suppose specifically for the energy industry, there's a couple of things. While the energy industries and utilities, oil and gas, renewables, you name it, deserve huge credit for keeping the lights on, keeping the energy flowing, many of them will have a challenge or have a challenge in 2020-21 because of COVID. A lot of government support have been given to individuals, to commercial employers, businesses. Many energy companies will have a cash flow problem or do have a cash flow problem. People aren't paying bills because there's a kind of a grace period that impacts their bottom line. So will they have the money to invest in some new stuff? So I do think that's a realistic thing we need to watch for. If you look at oil and gas, the traditional fossil fuel folks, the impact of all of the impetus around net zero, them getting funding to do new projects. Now, many of the oil and gas companies are moving into renewables, offshore wind, green hydrogen, you name it. But again, there are significant challenges coming towards those companies as the whole ESG, environmental and social and governance implications around climate hit them. So will they have the money to invest? Another thing that I found quite interesting over the past 12 months is that we talk about drones and the inspection of a physical asset up close. And we speak about beyond visual line of sight. And some of the regulations have progressed in the US and in Europe. They've slowed down. In Europe, they were delayed by at least 6 months because of COVID, but now they're out in transition for the next 2 years. But I'm curious what the impacts will be on beyond visual line of sight because of the rise of satellite imaging. There's more and more satellites up there with some incredible capabilities, not just on photos, but infrared, methane emissions, NOx emissions, you name it. And every day there seems to be another satellite going or another rocket going up somewhere with a whole constellation of low Earth orbit satellites. I think that's a good thing, but I'm wondering, will that take some business away from, say, beyond visual line of sight? Again, it depends on the use case. But yeah, there are some challenges, but overall, I think it's quite positive.
So what's the future hold for drones in the energy industry? For
the future, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. And, this crisis has been tragic on so many levels, but we will get through it, right? And I do see a huge opportunity around drone technology, that industry going forward. And the reason I say that is if you look at the new US infrastructure bill. And I know politics and takes a while and here in Europe, we have the EU Green Deal. There's a lot of work going on around the new EU Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Union, and the same everywhere worldwide. But there is a need to build out a lot of new infrastructure to hit a lot of our net zero goals across the globe. Drone technology. So as we start building more things, drones are used in construction. As we start operating more things, drones are used more and more as a kind of just a standard tool in inspections and. So I do believe there's huge opportunity there. So inspections are going to continue and drones of all shapes and sizes are going to play a role. Another thing I think that's quite interesting is I think COVID highlighted how dependent we were on global supply chains. Whether you think that's a good or a bad idea, there are more things now about we need countries, regions need to become a bit more self-sufficient. And I know in the US, there's a whole push around, let's say, made in US programs. I've seen a couple of new US commercial drone companies pop up in the past 12 months. Same in Europe. So again, I think there's opportunities there. It's not that there's like 3 or 4 big players in the industry today and that's it. They're done. There's opportunity for new kids on the block. So that's not bad because new kids will have new technologies. So I'm quite optimistic in terms of if you look at the challenges facing the energy industry, whether it's an existing asset and you want to reduce cost, well then predictive maintenance and drones play a key role in that, and. So I think there's a huge role there for new opportunities. So I'm quite optimistic. And the whole drone thing, delivery and. We're only getting started.
And for my final question, Kevin, what's the takeaway for the power industry over the last 12 months?
Do you know what? As cool as technology is, and I'm a big technology gadget guy, you can't get rid of the people. You still need people you need people for the expertise. You may not need the people on site or as many of the people on site, but you need the human expertise. And maybe they're dialing in through Zoom or an augmented reality headset, or they're flying the drone from 1,000 miles away. But we're not done with humans yet. So technology is a tool. It's a great tool. But I think there's a good outlook for us humans yet.
That's it for episode 315 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Kevin O'Donovan. If you want to learn more about Kevin's company or services, or just want to connect with him, check out the webpage at kevin-o'donovan.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.